Today I'm talking about one of my favorite cryptids, the swamp cabbage man. When I was a kid, I read Wiley and the Hairy Man, which is good because it educated me there's wild hairy men in the woods that will try to diddle me. There may have been a moral lesson, but the important part of this Alabama folktale is that there's a man-eating swamp dweller. Legends of hairy monsters are found in Texas, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, practically all the southern states. The colloquial names vary, from skunk ape, swamp cabbage man, Fouke Monster, but they're all basically the same. They're 7 feet tall, covered in hair, they got claws like a bear, and they stink. I mean, they reek. They say you'll smell it long before you get close to it. And we know that's true because that's a quote from Frank Lee. He's the founder of the Central Alabama Society for Paranormal Investigation and Research. Casper, that's witty. The melonheads of Connecticut are another cryptid legend, but you can't track melonheads across the globe. With humanoid beasts you can. So let's take a journey then, Carmen Sandiego style. Where in the world is Sasquatch? Let's begin our journey in America, the land of fluff. The southern Sasquatch got its big break when it was the star of The Legend of Boggy Creek. They picked it up from a Walmart DVD bin. Oh, what a time to be alive when you can rummage like a raccoon through a heaping pile of movie trash. The Legend of Boggy Creek told the tale of the Fouke Monster that terrorized the small Arkansas town of Fouke. They drew inspiration from real accounts, using actual locals to tell the story. It's super low budget, but it creeped the hell out of me and spawned 4 sequels, so they did a good job. The Fouke Monster is easily the most well-known cryptid in the eastern US, but more intriguing to me is the Alabama white thing. White Thang. Yes, that's really the correct terminology. The legend of the Alabama white thing has been around since the 1930s. Sightings have mainly occurred in the areas between Morgan, Etowah, and Jefferson County. The reports from those who encountered the beast describe it as deceptively quick. It's also covered in white fur, and when it screeches, it sounds like a panther. And if you've never heard a panther call, it's, well, similar to the white thing. Farther north in Pennsylvania, you have the white Bigfoot. Someone actually managed to produce a tape for this one, which is a fun watch, but you're probably going to want to follow it up with the debunk right after that. Journeying on west in the territory around Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Ohio lives a 7-foot-tall, 300-pound cryptid called the Ohio Grassman. Further west, we have Momo the Monster, who haunts the town of Louisiana, Missouri. Momo is short for Missouri Monster and was first sighted in 1972. Again, like its cousins, the monster is 7 foot tall, covered in fur, and emits a horrible stench. The stench was described as moldy horse smell or strong garbage, which is close to my own personal musk. What's unique about Momo is that first-hand reports state that the monster had no neck, similar to Blemmyes, which I'll get to later. In the south, Texas is home to the wild man of the Navidad. As early as 1836, a hairy man was rumored to be stealing livestock and food. But folktales of the wild man got muddied over the years, and it gets pretty bizarre. Some said that the wild man was actually a lone African prince who escaped his slaver and lived as an animal because he didn't know English. The most popular American cryptid is obviously Bigfoot, the northwestern Sasquatch. Sasquatch comes from the Hakamelam word Sasquatch, meaning wild man. The legends of this wild man are prevalent in many of the Native American tribes. The Lummi Nation has stories about their Sasquatch, Semeques, and in Cherokee mythology, there's the great lord of the game, Sul Kalu. As American settlers began setting up in the West, these legends were adopted into US culture. Daniel Boone, the explorer, claimed to have shot a 10-foot hairy giant which he dubbed the Yahoo. Boone's a bit of an embellisher though. The Yahoos are hairy humanoids that are featured in Gulliver's Travels, which coincidentally was Boone's favorite book at the time. So yeah, he was talking out of his ass. As expected, the northwestern Bigfoot is described as roughly 6 to 9 feet tall, covered in hair, and having a strong, unpleasant smell. As you can see, America has many different versions of this legend, but it's a big country. Now let's pack up and journey across the Pacific. Japan is home to the Hibagon. This monster is described as a black creature with white hands and large white feet, standing about 5 feet tall. The first account of the Hibagon occurred in 1970, in a situation that I would think would be a perfect monster movie opener. Elementary students were out picking mushrooms when all of a sudden a hairy half-man, half-ape creature came crashing through the forest. And of course, the creature was accompanied by a foul smell. To the south, there is the Yowie, a common creature in Aboriginal Australian folklore. The Yowie is hairy, ape-like, standing around 7 feet tall. Old Bungaree, a Gunnedah Aboriginal, said at one time there were tribes of them, and they were the original inhabitants of the country. Arriving at the mainland, China's Yeren has the same description, and so does the Mongolian Almas, Almas being Mongolian for wild man. The true celebrity in the area, though, is the Yeti, the abominable snowman. The Yeti goes way back to the legends of the Himalayan people. The Lepcha worshipped a glacier being. He was the god of the hunt. A bit to the east, the Mande Burung is an ape-like creature inhabiting the Meghalaya subtropical forests in India. And westward bound, the Barmanu of Pakistan has a nasty reputation of abducting women and attempting to mate with them, not unlike the Cliffus huxtabulus of Brooklyn, New York. Europe is no exception to the legends of hairy men. Scotland has reports of the Jesus Christ. I'm not going to try that. The Big Grey Man. This cryptid is enormous, reportedly over 10 feet tall and covered with a fine fur. Some highbrow cryptozoologists think because of its size, it doesn't fit into the same group as Bigfoot. But I'm not that kind of jackass. As you can see, wild men span the globe, but they all share striking similarities. What would explain that? Well, let's look back, like way back. Where in the past is Sasquatch? The myth of the wild man goes back to one of the earliest works of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, dated back to 2100 BC. Enkidu is a prominent character in the tablets. He's covered in hair, lives with animals, he's ignorant to civilization, he's the embodiment of wilderness. Without going into the exact story, I do want to share a fun tidbit though. For 6 days and 7 nights, Enkidu makes love to a temple prostitute. He has sex with her. Afterwards, he realizes her scent is staying on him. Because of this, the animals run away from him, preventing him to continue as a wild man. In the 2nd century BC, the Book of Daniel is written.
Cool, wait a minute. The fuck?
The character Nebuchadnezzar loses his sanity for 7 years. He grows hair all over his body and is forced to live as a beast away from society. Check out this fantastic retelling.
And as the story goes, he was turned into a wild beast and exiled from the kingdom. And so on, he wandered and wandered and wandered and wandered some more.
Continuing down the timeline, in Greek and Roman mythology, you got satyrs and fauns. Satyrs were originally depicted as animalistic men, with the tail of horses and raging members. They looked very much like woodwoses, the hairy wild men of the woods. Woodwoses were quite popular in medieval times. They were frequent characters in literature and artwork. As you can see, the legend of wild men continually gets passed down through each era, from generation to generation, always retaining their core characteristics. Wild, hairy, and not entirely human. Blemmyes also have all these characteristics. Otherwise known as headless men, they were said to be inhabitants around Ethiopia, Libya, or India, depending on your source. They're described as wild men and women with no neck, or with faces sunken into their chest. In the book De Natura, written around 1349, the headless inhabitants are described as being covered all over their body with a coarse hair, like wild animals. A Latin account of Blemmyes describes the headless men as being of a golden color, measuring 12 feet tall and 7 feet wide. Blemmyes and wild men are basically one and the same. The only difference is the whole neck thing, but that makes Momo our missing link. He was described as having no neck. Just like wild men, we can track them through the ages. In Othello, Shakespeare wrote of the men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders, and Lewis Carroll supposedly drew inspiration from the Blemmyes when creating Humpty Dumpty. It's no wonder we have so many iterations of this monster. Sasquatch isn't just found throughout the world, he's found throughout time. Culturally, the wild man seems to take different tones, depending on the era. In ancient times, it seems a wild man is one straying from God. In classical times, we shift to seeing wild men actually as gods, like Sylvanus, the Roman deity of the woods. And in the medieval ages, the stories turn more fanciful, more magical. Gunglof, a wild man from the stories of King Arthur, and the Russian Dvin, both have the power of seeing the future. But whatever the role played, he's always there. He's like a Where's Waldo in time. Why is this figure so ingrained into human culture? Well, here's how I see it. The moment we chose agriculture to become domestic, we split paths with the wild man, a possible path in evolution. Humans now have to stifle their natural animalistic tendencies in favor of this easier lifestyle, and it bothers us. Civilization makes us soft, and concerns for this pop up in every age, eventually leading to myths and legends to comfort ourselves. Through all our scientific growth, we are still not immune to the discomfort of domestication. Only a century ago, the American people were concerned that urbanization was making the population weak, over-intellectualized. Joseph Knowles set out in the summer of 1913 to prove them all wrong, that modern man was just as strong as his ancestors and more. He failed, like miserably. He got drunk and moped in a cabin, but he lied to the press and the people ate it up. Crowds flocked to get a sight of him, women fawned over his masculinity. They were comforted by this legend. It's obvious we miss being in tune with our nature. Cryptids like Sasquatch, who are man-animal hybrids, are just expressions of that part of us. But real wild men, and I don't mean just men, I mean humans who can get back to their roots, exist today. And they're revered. Many of us admire the ability to take off life's shackles and live for one's own existence, not for someone else's aspirations. And that's why we still romanticize those missing links to this day. For most of us, it's just a fun legend that we know doesn't actually exist, just like the American dream, but yet the legend doesn't die. Hardcore believers exist, and I'm happy they do. After all, we are just animals, and I don't ever want to stop romanticizing that.